A single father was kicked out of a restaurant with his son until a mysterious woman paid the bill. What began as kindness turned into a great love that changed their lives forever. A story of overcoming an unexpected love that will touch your heart. Subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment where you are watching from. The restaurant, The Secret Garden, exuded elegance on a March morning, with its exposed brick walls adorned with artificial vines and bronze light fixtures that created a cozy atmosphere in the heart of the West Village. The solid wood tables, covered with immaculate white linen tablecloths, were strategically positioned to offer privacy to the patrons who frequented that piece of Italy in New York City. The aroma of fresh basil and homemade tomato sauce lingered in the air, blending with the soft sound of an Italian jazz playlist emanating from discreet speakers installed between the ceiling beams. David Johnson, 35 years old, nervously adjusted the navy blue tie he had chosen especially for the occasion. His brown hair, slightly graying at the temples, a premature mark of the last few tough years, was meticulously styled. The grey suit, although not of the best in quality, had been carefully pressed the night before. His dark brown eyes reflected a mix of anxiety and determination as he watched his son, Ethan, studying the menu with the seriousness of an adult. "Dad, can I order that Grandma's gnocchi from the cartoon?" Ethan asked, his green eyes shining with anticipation. The boy had inherited his mother's light hair and the freckles that dotted his upturned nose. He wore a white dress shirt and dark jeans, his most formal outfit, carefully chosen to celebrate his excellent report card. "Of course, champ, you deserve it. You got all high marks this semester," David replied, trying to mask the worry gnawing at his stomach. He had checked his bank account balance 3 times before leaving home, but the bills for the month had consumed almost everything. There were only $400 left on the debit card. Enough for dinner, he calculated. The waiter, a young man of about 25 with a heavy Italian accent, approached the table with a professional smile. "Good evening, gentlemen. Have you decided what you would like?" "Yes," David replied, quickly consulting the menu once more. "For my son, the Grandma's gnocchi with bolognese sauce, and for me, the porcini mushroom risotto." "Excellent choice. And to drink? 2 sparkling waters and a fresh orange juice for him." While they waited for their order, David discreetly observed the other customers. Executives in suits discussed business in English. Elegant couples savored expensive wines, and wealthy families celebrated birthdays with bottles of champagne. He felt out of place, but pushed those thoughts aside. Ethan deserved that special moment. "Dad, Aunt Helen said you're always tired because of work. Is that true?" Ethan asked, fiddling with the cut-glass salt shaker. David sighed discreetly. Helen, his ex-mother-in-law, never missed an opportunity to criticize his life choices since Marina had left. "No, son, it's just that Dad works hard to take good care of you, but I'm not really tired. I enjoy what I do." "And when are you going to find a girlfriend?" The question caught David off guard. "Why are you asking that?" "Because Jake from my class said everyone needs someone to love, and you're alone when I go to Grandma Helen's." Before David could respond, the waiter returned with the dishes. The gnocchi arrived on a white porcelain plate garnished with fresh herbs, the bolognese sauce exuding an irresistible aroma. David's risotto was creamy and fragrant, sprinkled with freshly grated Parmesan cheese. "This is delicious, Dad," Ethan exclaimed after his first bite. David smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. Any sacrifice was worth it to see that sparkle in his son's eyes. They talked about school, friends, and plans for the upcoming holidays. For almost an hour, David forgot about financial worries and allowed himself to simply be a father. When they finished dessert, a tiramisu that Ethan insisted on sharing, the waiter brought the bill. David felt his stomach tighten upon seeing the total, $380. He breathed a sigh of relief and confidently extended the debit card. The waiter returned after a few minutes with an embarrassed expression. "I'm sorry, sir, but the card was declined. Can you try another?" David's blood ran cold. "It must be a system error. Can you try again?" "I've tried 3 times, sir." The conversations at neighboring tables seemed to lower in volume. David felt curious glances turning toward his table. His hands trembled slightly as he searched for another card in his wallet, knowing that the credit card had been blocked for 2 months. "Dad, what's happening?" Ethan whispered, sensing the tension in the air. "Nothing, son, just a little problem with the card." The manager, a middle-aged man with a well-groomed mustache and a stern expression, approached the table. "Mr. Johnson, do you have another form of payment? I can try to transfer money from another account using my mobile phone. Just a moment." "I'm sorry, but our policy is clear. We cannot wait. You need to resolve the situation immediately, or we will have to ask you to leave." The manager's voice was louder than necessary, drawing even more attention. David felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. Ethan shrank in his chair, his eyes beginning to well up. "Please, just give me 5 minutes. My son—" "There's no discussion, sir. Please follow me to the exit." It was at that moment that a soft but firm female voice interrupted the public humiliation. "Excuse me," said the woman elegantly rising from the table next to them. "I would like to pay this family's bill." David turned, surprised. A woman in her early 30s with wavy brown hair tied back, in a sophisticated bun, wearing a sharply tailored black blazer over a white silk blouse, she extended a golden card to the manager. Her almond-shaped eyes conveyed determination and kindness in equal measure. "No, that's not necessary," protested David, feeling even more humiliated. The woman stepped closer and whispered just for him to hear, "We all deserve a second chance." The manager, visibly embarrassed by the intervention, processed the payment quickly. The woman signed the receipt and turned back to David. "Enjoy the rest of your evening. New York has many opportunities for those who don't give up." With that, she returned to her table, grabbed her Italian leather handbag, and left the restaurant, leaving only the subtle scent of lavender and a lesson on human dignity that David would never forget. The weeks that followed the incident at the secret garden turned into a whirlwind of conflicting emotions for David. Every morning, waking up in the small 2-bedroom apartment on the East Side, he mentally relived that moment of humiliation and the subsequent intervention of the mysterious woman. The bathroom mirror reflected deeper dark circles and an expression of fatigue that seemed to have settled permanently on his face. "Dad, are you okay?" asked Ethan during breakfast on a rainy Thursday morning in April. The boy chewed slowly on his buttered toast, observing his father with the keen perception of children who grow up too fast. "I'm fine, son. Just thinking about work," David lied, mechanically stirring the coffee that had cooled in his cup. The truth was that he could barely concentrate on the accounting reports piling up on his desk at Johnson & Associates, a mid-sized firm specializing in financial management for small businesses located in downtown New York. The morning routine was always the same. Drop Ethan off at Mr. John Smith's public school, take the subway at the Carrow station, and face a 40-minute commute to the Say station, walking another 10 minutes to the office in the commercial building on Fifth Avenue. During the journey, he tried to mentally organize the day's tasks, but inevitably his thoughts returned to that elegant woman. The office of Johnson & Associates occupied the 12th floor of a 1970s building with worn grey carpet and plywood partitions creating small cubicles for the employees. David's desk was near the window, where he could observe the frenetic movement of the street and occasionally catch a glimpse of the Cathedral of St. Patrick in the distance. his Excel. Spreadsheets remained open on the screen of his 2018 Dell computer, but his mind wandered constantly. "David, can you come here for a moment?" called Marcos Pereira, his direct supervisor, a 52-year-old man with a prominent belly and advanced baldness that he compensated for with a thick graying moustache. Marcos's office, though modest, exuded authority with its framed diplomas on the walls and a shelf filled with updated tax codes. The dark wooden desk was always impeccably organized, with stacks of documents separated by colorful clips. "Have a seat," said Marcos, gesturing to the synthetic leather chair in front of the desk. "I have some important news to share with you." David felt his stomach tighten. In recent months, important news had rarely been positive. "Go ahead." "The company has hired a new financial director. She is coming from Washington, D.C. with excellent references and will oversee our accounting reports." Marcos paused dramatically, flipping through some papers. "She will start next Monday and will work directly with us on restructuring our internal processes." "I see," replied David, trying to mask his concern. Changes in hierarchy always meant performance evaluations, and consequently, risks for those who did not stand out. "She has a master's degree in business administration from Georgetown University and experience in multinational companies. I expect you to demonstrate the same professionalism as always." Over the weekend, David tried to focus on activities with Ethan, but the anxiety about the new director's arrival consumed him. They visited Central Park on a sunny Saturday, walked around the koi pond, and ate pastries at a fair that stretched along Fifth Avenue. Ethan ran between the trees, laughing loudly, while David pretended to be present, but his mind remained fixated on the possible changes the new management would bring. "Dad, did you like that woman from the restaurant?" Ethan suddenly asked, watching the ducks swimming in the pond. The question caught David off guard. "Why are you asking that?" "Because you've been deep in thought since that day. And she was pretty and kind." David sighed deeply. How could he explain to an 8-year-old the complexities of an adult's feelings wounded by pride? "She was very kind to us, son, but we don't know her." "But would you like to know her?" The brutal honesty of children always disarmed him. "Maybe, Ethan, maybe." On Sunday night, while helping Ethan with his math homework at the small kitchen table, David allowed himself to briefly fantasize about meeting that woman again. He imagined thanking her properly, perhaps inviting her for coffee, explaining that he wasn't usually irresponsible with money. But reality imposed itself. Men like him did not engage with women like her. The class difference was too obvious to ignore. Monday arrived accompanied by a typical drizzle of autumn in New York. David arrived at the office 15 minutes early, tidied his desk and checked that his light blue dress shirt was well pressed. At 9 o'clock sharp, Marcos gathered the entire team in the conference room for the formal introductions. "Everyone, I want to introduce our new financial director, Caroline Anderson." David lifted his eyes from the papers he was pretending to organize and felt the world spin in slow motion. Walking through the conference room door, with the same elegance as that night in the restaurant, was the mysterious woman. She wore a dark grey suit, her hair pulled back in an immaculate bun, and her almond-shaped eyes quickly scanned the room until they landed on his. For a fraction of a second, David saw a glimmer. David felt a sense of recognition in her gaze. But Caroline maintained a professional expression as she greeted each team member. "It's a pleasure to work with you all. I hope we can develop a productive partnership in the coming months." When it was David's turn, she extended her hand with a firm, professional grip. "David Johnson, senior accountant," he introduced himself, feeling his palm dampen with nerves. "Caroline Anderson." "Nice to meet you," she replied, holding the handshake for just the necessary protocol time, But David noticed a slight hesitation in her voice. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur. Caroline explained her goals for the upcoming quarters, her management philosophy based on transparency and efficiency, and the new procedures that would be gradually implemented. David tried to focus on her words, but he could only mentally relive the humiliation at the restaurant and imagine what she must be thinking about him at that moment. When the meeting ended, David practically fled to his cubicle, pretending to have urgent work. His hands trembled slightly as he typed meaningless reports, the cursor blinking mockingly on the computer screen. Life had played another cruel trick on him. The only person who had witnessed his moment of greatest vulnerability was now his direct supervisor, with the power to decide his professional future and, consequently, Ethan's well-being. The 2 weeks following Caroline's arrival transformed the office environment into a minefield of unspoken tensions. David devised elaborate strategies to avoid casual encounters. He arrived 15 minutes early to finish reports before she showed up, lunched at alternate times in the small buffet restaurant on Baruch Street, and volunteered for external meetings whenever possible. David's cubicle, once his quiet refuge, had become a glass prison where every movement seemed to be watched. The beige laminate table, with its organized stacks of tax documents and the framed photo of Ethan at his second-grade graduation, no longer offered the comfort it once did. The Dell computer, with its slightly yellowed screen, now reflected not only Excel spreadsheets, but also the constant anxiety that had settled into his routine. "David, are you okay? You seem a bit wired lately," commented Fernanda, the 43-year-old administrative assistant in the adjacent cubicle. Her red-framed glasses rested on the tip of her nose as she observed her colleague with maternal curiosity. "I'm great, Fernanda. Just focused on the monthly closing reports," David lied, nervously adjusting the navy blue tie he had worn for 3 consecutive days, a clear sign of his altered mental state. Fernanda was not convinced. With 15 years at the company, she knew each employee as if they were distant relatives. "Look, I know leadership changes make everyone nervous, but Caroline seems nice. Yesterday she asked about the donation campaign for the community daycare and insisted on contributing." Fernanda's comment only intensified David's unease. Of course, Caroline was generous. He had witnessed that firsthand in a way he would never forget. But that generosity, coming from someone clearly privileged, only reinforced the social chasm that existed between them. On Tuesday of the second week, Caroline implemented a new dynamic: morning alignment meetings at 8 o'clock in the conference room overlooking St. Patrick's Cathedral. The tempered glass walls offered a panoramic view of the historic center of New York City, but for David, that space had become a stage for psychological torture. "Good morning, everyone," Caroline said, entering promptly at 8 with a cup of coffee in a white porcelain mug. She wore a black blazer over a cream silk blouse, her hair flowing in soft waves that framed her face. The subtle scent of lavender, the same as that night, filled the room discreetly. "Today we're going to review the accounts payable reports from the previous quarter. David, can you present the summary?" David felt his mouth dry instantly. His hands, holding the A4 sheets with the compiled data, trembled almost imperceptibly. "Sure, in the first quarter we had a total volume of—" As he spoke, he noticed Caroline watching him with professional attention, occasionally jotting down notes in a black moleskin notebook. Her almond-shaped eyes focused on the numbers presented, but David couldn't help but wonder if she was evaluating not only his work, but also remembering that pathetic man who couldn't pay for a dinner. "Excellent analysis, David. You correctly identified the optimization points," Caroline praised at the end of the presentation. "We can implement your suggestions next month." The compliment, instead of calming him, only intensified his paranoia. Was it sincere or a subtle form of condescension? Was Caroline being professional or pitying? After the meeting, when the other employees dispersed to their respective tasks, Caroline approached his desk. "David, can I talk to you for a moment?" His heart raced. "Sure." She pulled out Fernanda's chair, which had been left for protocol, documents on the ground floor, and sat upright, her hands clasped on the table. "I wanted to congratulate you on the quality of your reports. Mark told me you have exemplary dedication to the company." "Thank you," David replied, avoiding direct eye contact. "I also wanted to mention that I noticed some unpaid overtime in the system records. That's not necessary, you know. The company values the quality of work, not the number of hours." David finally met her gaze. "They're not overtime hours. I just like to make sure everything is correct." "I completely understand that concern, but a balance between work and personal life is essential. You have a son, don't you? The mention of Ethan caught him off guard. How do you know that?" "Mark mentioned it during my onboarding process. He said you're a very dedicated father." An awkward silence settled between them. Caroline lightly drummed her fingers on the table, as if deciding whether to continue. "David," she finally said, lowering her voice slightly, "if you need anything, any professional guidance or support, you can talk to me. We're on the same team." He felt his cheeks burn. There was a subtext to that, conversation that they both recognized, but neither dared to verbalize. "Thank you, but I'm fine. I don't need anything." "Of course. I just wanted you to know." Caroline gracefully stood up and returned to her office, leaving David alone with his tumultuous thoughts and the lingering scent of lavender that seemed to have permeated the air around his desk. That afternoon, while organizing invoices in the archives on the 12th floor, David allowed himself for the first time to question his own reactions. Why did her presence bother him so much? Was it just the embarrassment of the situation at the restaurant, or was there something deeper, an attraction he didn't want to admit even to himself? When he got home that night, he found Ethan drawing at the kitchen table. The boy had scribbled a family of 3 in front of a colorful house. "Who are these people, champ?" "It's us," Ethan replied, pointing to the figures with blue crayon. "You, me, and the nice lady from the restaurant." David sat heavily in the chair next to his son. "Ethan, you can't keep thinking about this. That was just an act of kindness. But she was nice to us, and you act different when you talk about her." Ethan's sharp perception surprised him again. Children were natural detectors of unexpressed emotions. "What do you mean different?" "More nervous, just like when Grandma Helen complains about something." David laughed despite himself. "It's not quite like that, son." "Then why don't you talk to her? We could invite her for ice cream." Ethan's innocent suggestion contrasted brutally with the complexity of the real situation. How could he explain to a child that the adult world was full of invisible hierarchies, class differences, and pride wounds that made the simplest relationships impossible? "Sometimes things are more complicated than they seem, Ethan." "But the teacher said that when you like someone, you have to be brave." While helping Ethan put away his school supplies, David reflected on his son's words. Maybe the problem wasn't Caroline or the embarrassing situation they had experienced. Maybe the problem was his own inability to accept that he deserved something good in his life. June arrived with the characteristic dry air of New York's winter and brought with it the company's traditional summer festival, an event that Caroline had insisted on keeping, even though she was new to the organization. The inner courtyard of the office building, usually used only as a smoking area, was transformed into an improvised fair with colorful crepe paper streamers hanging between the concrete columns, wooden stalls selling homemade treats, and a small artificial bonfire surrounded by hay bales. "Dad, are you sure I can go?" Ethan asked for the 5th time, as David adjusted the red scarf around the boy's checkered shirt. They were in the men's locker room of the office, transforming into urban cowboys for the party that would start at 6 o'clock. "Of course you can, champ," Caroline said. "All employees could bring their families," David replied, avoiding mentioning that it had been specifically her who suggested he bring his son. The invitation had been made the previous Monday during one of the morning meetings, and for some reason he couldn't explain, he had accepted immediately. David wore a blue and red checkered shirt, dark jeans, and a straw hat he had hastily bought at a costume shop on 25th Street. He felt slightly ridiculous, but Ethan was radiating enthusiasm, which made any personal embarrassment irrelevant. When they went down to the courtyard, the party was already in full swing. Approximately 60 people were circulating among the stalls, where employees and their families sold homemade peanut candy, spoon brigadeiro, sweet corn pudding, colored popcorn, and steaming hot apple cider in aluminum mugs. An accordion played classic folk music from Johnny Cash and Willie Nelson, creating a northeastern countryside atmosphere in the heart of New York. "David, I'm so glad you guys came," exclaimed Sarah, approaching in an elaborate country costume, complete with painted freckles on her face and braids with colorful ribbons. "And this must be the famous Ethan." Ethan shyly hid behind his father's legs, but was soon won over by Sarah's natural charm, who led him to the fishing stall, where plastic fish floated in a blue basin attached to magnetic hooks. "Go on, son, try to win a prize," encouraged David, handing Ethan $5 to buy tokens. It was while watching Ethan concentrate intensely on the fishing that David saw her. Caroline was on the other side of the courtyard, near the hot apple cider stall, chatting animatedly with Mark and other directors. She wore a flowing red skirt with white polka dots that danced gently with her movements, a white puff-sleeve blouse, and a brown leather vest. Her hair was simply braided, held with red ribbons that highlighted the delicate shape of her face. But what caught David's attention the most was her expression. She seemed genuinely at ease, laughing spontaneously at her colleagues' comments, holding a mug of hot apple cider with both hands to warm herself from the evening chill. She was a younger, more relaxed version of the elegant executive he knew from the office. "Dad, I caught 3 fish!" Ethan shouted, running toward him with a green toy fish in hand. "The lady said I could choose a prize." "Congratulations, champ. What are you going to choose?" As Ethan deliberated between a colorful yo-yo and a toy car, David felt a familiar presence approaching. Without needing to look, the subtle scent of lavender announced Caroline's arrival. "Good evening," she said, smiling at Ethan. "You must be Ethan. I've heard a lot about you." Ethan looked at her with curiosity, clearly trying to remember where he knew her from. "Are you the lady from the restaurant?" David felt a chill run down his spine. Caroline blinked, slightly surprised by the child's frankness, but maintained her smile. "I'm Caroline, your father's new colleague. It's a pleasure to officially meet you." "Dad said you're very important at the company," Ethan said, with the brutal honesty typical of children. "Everyone is important here," Caroline replied diplomatically. "Your dad is one of our best employees." A slightly awkward silence settled between the adults, filled only by the chords of a traditional folk song echoing through the speakers and the hum of conversations around them. "Ethan, why don't you go try Mrs. Smith's sweet corn pudding?" David suggested, trying to create a moment of privacy. "Can I, Dad?" "Of course. Take $2 from my wallet." As Ethan excitedly ran toward the dessert stand, Caroline moved a little closer. "He's adorable. He looks a lot like you." "Thank you," David replied, watching Ethan enthusiastically chat with the lady serving sweet corn pudding. "David," Caroline said, lowering her voice, "about that night at the restaurant." "We don't need to talk about it," he interrupted quickly. "It's in the past. But I would like to explain. It wasn't pity or condescension. It was empathy." He looked at her for the first time since the conversation began. Her almond-shaped eyes reflected sincerity, but David still felt uncomfortable with the topic. "You don't owe me any explanation." "Maybe not, but I want you to understand that we've all been through tough times. I've been in situations where I needed unexpected help." Before David could respond, the excited voice of the host echoed across the yard through a crackling microphone. "Everyone, let's form pairs for the traditional square dance. Come to the center." Employees began to organize into lines, men on one side and women on the other. Ethan ran back to his dad, his mouth smeared with sweet corn pudding and his eyes shining with anticipation. "Dad, are you going to dance?" "I don't know, son. It's been a long time since I danced." "Can I be your partner?" Caroline offered, extending her hand with a mischievous smile that completely transformed her usually serious expression. David hesitated for a moment, aware that accepting would mean breaking the professional distance he had so carefully built over the past weeks. "Come on, Dad. It'll be fun," Ethan insisted, literally pushing his father toward Caroline. With no alternative that didn't seem rude, David accepted the extended hand. "All right, but I warn you, I'm a terrible dancer." "So am I," Caroline lied, positioning herself in the women's line. The music began with the traditional "Look to the sky, my love," and the pairs followed the instructions shouted by the host. "Anarie, turn to the right, swing." David stumbled on the first turn, stepped on his own foot during the "Greeting the Ladies," and nearly knocked Caroline over during the walk. But with each mistake, she laughed more heartily, infecting him with her genuine joy. "À l'avant-tout," shouted the host, and everyone joined in the center of the circle. It was at that moment, with Caroline very close, their hands joined high and their faces almost touching, that David realized something fundamental. She wasn't pretending to have fun. Her eyes sparkled with real joy, her cheeks flushed from the effort of dancing and the hot apple cider, and she laughed like a child discovering a new game. When the music ended with enthusiastic applause from the entire party, Caroline leaned closer to his ear to be heard above the celebration. "Thank you for the dance. It was unexpectedly fun." David felt her warm breath near his neck, and for the first time in months, smiled genuinely. "It was fun for me, too." Helen Roberts adjusted the floral apron over her navy blue dress while preparing morning coffee in the two-bedroom apartment in East Side, where she had lived since becoming a widow 3 years ago. The small kitchen, with slightly yellowed white tiles and a red formica table that had witnessed decades of family conversations, exuded the comforting aroma of toasted French bread and freshly brewed coffee. At 62, Helen maintained the upright posture and steady gaze of someone who had raised 4 children alone after her husband's premature death, and now dedicated herself entirely to caring for her grandson. "Ethan, come have coffee, my angel," she bawled, her voice echoing down the narrow hallway decorated with family photographs in golden frames. Among the portraits stood out a photo of Mary and David's wedding, taken 5 years earlier at a simple ceremony in a local church, where both smiled innocently at the photographer, unaware of the storms the future held. Ethan appeared in the kitchen, wearing his school uniform, a white shirt, navy blue pants and black sneakers, with his hair still tousled from the pillow. Even at 8 years old, he already displayed the same stubborn independence that characterized his father, insisting on packing his backpack and tying his shoelaces by himself. "Grandma Helen, is my dad dating?" Ethan suddenly asked while spreading strawberry jam on the toasted bread. Helen almost dropped the coffee cup she was bringing to her mouth. Why are you asking that, my grandson? Because he acts differently when he talks about a lady from work, and at the company party they dance together. Helen's expression stiffened imperceptibly. Since Mary had passed away, she had secretly hoped that the two would eventually reconcile. After all, separated families were the exception in her generation, and divorces still carried a social stigma in her circle of elderly friends. "Your father hasn't told me anything about that," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "What's this lady like?" "She's pretty and smells nice, and she was the one who helped us at the restaurant when Dad's card didn't work." Helen felt a tightness in her chest. David had vaguely mentioned a little embarrassment at a restaurant, but he had never explained the details. The idea of her son-in-law needing financial help from a stranger deeply troubled him, not only because of the humiliation he must have felt, but also because it suggested that his daughter Mary had been wise to leave when she did. "Ethan, you shouldn't be making up stories about your father," she gently admonished. "He already has enough responsibilities taking care of you." "But I like her, Grandma. She's nice." That afternoon, when David arrived to pick up Ethan after work, Grandma Helen had already formulated her concerns into carefully rehearsed phrases. She welcomed him into the small living room, decorated with floral-patterned sofas and a wooden rack where a 29-inch television competed for space, with family photos and a small statue of the Virgin Mary. "David, sit down. For a bit. I want to talk to you," she said, indicating the armchair where Ethan usually watched cartoons. "Sure, Helen. Is there a problem with Ethan?" "Not exactly." She settled into the sofa, folding her hands in her lap in a posture that David recognized as a prelude to serious conversations. "Ethan told me that you are interested in someone from work." David felt his stomach tighten. "Helen, let me finish," she gently interrupted him. "I'm not going to pretend I don't have an opinion about this. You're a young man. You have the right to be happy, but I need to think about my grandson." "And I don't think about him?" David replied, a hint of irritation coloring his voice. "You do, of course you do, but men, sometimes you get carried away by other needs." Helen paused delicately, choosing her words carefully. "Ethan told me that this woman is wealthy, that she paid your bill at an expensive restaurant." The embarrassment David thought he had overcome returned with full force. "That was a misunderstanding, an isolated situation." "David, my son," Helen said, using the affectionate term she had adopted since marrying Mary, "do you think a wealthy woman is going to seriously be interested in an accountant who rents in East Side, who will accept coming here to visit her boyfriend's family?" Helen's words echoed exactly the fears David had been trying to suppress for weeks. But hearing his insecurities verbalized by someone else made them feel even more real and painful. "She's not like that, Helen. Caroline is different." "Caroline," Helen repeated, trying out the name. "A name for someone classy. Where is she from?" "Washington, D.C. She has a master's degree and came to run the finance department at the company." "See? Washington, D.C. daughter. Of a politician or businessman, for sure. David, these women play with men like you. When she tires of dating a man of the people, she'll go back to her world." Ethan appeared in the room at that moment, carrying his school backpack and a colorful drawing he had made during the afternoon. "Dad, look what I drew," he said, showing a paper where 3 stick figures represented a happy family in front of a colorful house. "That's very nice, champ," David replied, but his voice sounded distant. During the bus ride back home on the crowded line connecting east side to the east side, Ethan noticed the change in his father's mood. "Dad, did Grandma Helen say something that made you sad?" David looked at his son, sitting next to him on the blue plastic seat of the municipal bus. The frankness in the question completely disarmed him. "Sometimes adults worry about things that might not work out, Ethan." But the teacher said we shouldn't be afraid to try new things. Your teacher is right. But sometimes life is more complicated than school teachers. Because of the difference in money, Ethan's sharp perception surprised him again. How could an 8-year-old identify so clearly issues that adults spent years trying to process? It's one of the things, yes. But if she likes you and you like her, money shouldn't matter. David sighed deeply, watching the urban landscape of New York through the foggy bus window. Residential buildings mixed with small businesses, people hurried along the poorly maintained sidewalks, and the heavy evening traffic created a chaotic symphony of honks and engines. It should be that way, son. It should. That night, after putting Ethan to bed and helping him with the prayer Grandma Helen had taught, "Guardian angel, my dear friend, come stay with me." David sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm coffee and allowed himself to confront his feelings honestly. Helen's words had touched on wounds he preferred to keep buried. Since Mary had left, claiming he lacked ambition and was tired of living with financial limitations, David had developed a shell of self-protection that prevented him from taking emotional risks. But Caroline was different. During the summer festival, he had glimpsed a genuine woman behind the competent executive. The way she laughed, how she naturally interacted with employees at all levels, how she genuinely enjoyed the folk dance. None of it seemed like an act. However, Helen's words echoed with the force of lived experience. Men like you and women like her didn't mix in the real world. Social class differences were not just matters of money, but of cultural codes, family expectations, and incompatible life plans. David took the last sip of his now cold coffee and allowed himself a brief fantasy. Caroline meeting Helen, chatting naturally in the small kitchen, playing with Ethan on the floral sofa, participating in simple but warm family celebrations. The image was both seductive and absurdly unlikely. Perhaps Helen was right. Perhaps he was deluding himself with possibilities that existed only in his desperate imagination for connection and affection. Perhaps it would be better to maintain professional distance and protect his heart, and Ethan's, from yet another inevitable disappointment. The phone rang at 6:20. On the morning of a Tuesday in August, the shrill sound of the landline in the kitchen brutally interrupted David's sleep. The noise echoed through the small apartment, causing Ethan to stir restlessly in the next room. David stumbled down the narrow hallway, still groggy, and answered, with a hoarse voice. "Hello? David, it's Mrs. Smith, Helen's neighbor," an urgent female voice said on the other end. "You need to come here immediately. Helen fell in the bathroom overnight and can't get up." David's blood ran cold instantly. "What do you mean she fell? Is she conscious?" "Yes, but she's complaining of a lot of pain in her right leg. I've already called EMS, but you know how it is. It might take a while. You should come quickly." David hung up the phone and rushed to Ethan's room, who had already woken up from the noise of the conversation. "Dad, what happened?" "Grandma Helen got hurt, champ. We need to go there now." David hurriedly opened the wardrobe, grabbing the first clothes he found. "Put on these jeans and this shirt. Hurry." The trip to the east side had never felt so long. On the crowded Red Line subway, Ethan remained silent, hugging the teddy bear he insisted on bringing. His green eyes reflected the same worry David felt, but was trying to mask with reassuring expressions. "Is Grandma going to be okay, Dad?" Ethan asked as they got off at the local subway station to catch the bus that would take them to the housing complex where Helen lived. "Of course she will, son. She's strong, you know that." But internally, David was preparing for the worst. At 62, Helen had developed osteoporosis after menopause, and a fall could mean serious fractures that would drastically complicate all their lives. When they arrived at the ground-floor apartment in Block C of the East Side housing complex, they found Helen lying on the bathroom floor, covered with a blanket that Mrs. Smith had brought. Her grey hair was disheveled, her pale face contorted in pain, but her eyes retained their characteristic determination. "David, thank God you're here," she said weakly. "I slipped in the shower while I was taking a bath. I think I broke something in my leg." EMS arrived 20 minutes later. Two uniformed paramedics quickly assessed the situation and confirmed the need for hospitalization for more detailed examinations. The fracture in her right femur was diagnosed at the city hospital after 2 hours of waiting in crowded corridors filled with stretchers and wheelchairs. "Are you the responsible party for the patient?" asked the attending physician, a young man of about 30, with the tired appearance typical of someone who had spent the night attending emergencies. "I'm her son-in-law," David replied. "She takes care of my son. The fracture will require surgery for pin placement. The post-operative period demands complete rest for at least 6 weeks, followed by physical therapy. She will need full care during this time." The reality of the situation hit like a hammer. Helen was not only essential in caring for Ethan, but now she herself would need constant assistance, and David was the only person available to take on that responsibility. Over the next 2 weeks, David's routine transformed completely. His mornings began at 5:30, preparing Ethan for school, dropping him off at Mrs. Smith's house, who kindly offered to take care of the boy until it was time to leave, working all day at the company, picking Ethan up in the late afternoon, bringing dinner to Helen at the hospital, helping Ethan with his homework, and finally collapsing exhausted into bed around midnight. At the office, his productivity visibly plummeted. The spreadsheets that were once completed with military precision now contained small errors. Reports were delivered at the last possible minute, and his appearance showed clear signs of stress. Deep dark circles, an unshaven face, more often slightly wrinkled shirts. "David, are you okay?" Caroline asked during one of the Friday morning meetings. It was the first time in weeks that she addressed him directly, and David realized he had missed several commitments and presentations in the past 2 weeks. "I'm fine, just some family issues I need to sort out." "Is there anything I can help with?" The offer of help, made discreetly after the meeting when the other employees had already dispersed, caught David off guard. He had managed to maintain professional distance from Caroline since the conversation with Helen, avoiding direct eye contact and limiting interactions to what was strictly necessary. "Thank you, but no. It's just a matter of better organizing my time." Caroline studied him for a moment, clearly sensing that there was more to the situation than he was revealing. "David, if you need flexibility in your schedule or a few days off, we can talk to HR. The company understands family emergencies. I don't want special treatment." It wouldn't be special treatment. It would be support for a valuable employee going through a tough time. That afternoon, when David arrived at the hospital for visiting hours, he found Helen in better spirits. The doctor had confirmed that the surgery had gone smoothly and that she could be discharged on Monday, but with the condition of complete rest at home. "David, my son, you look like you haven't slept in days," Helen observed, holding his hand with surprising strength for someone who had just undergone surgery. "I'm fine, Helen. I worry about you and Ethan." "That's exactly what I want to talk about." Helen adjusted herself better in the hospital bed, wincing slightly from the pain. "You can't keep running around like this. You're going to end up getting sick too." "We'll figure it out. We always do." "Listen carefully to what I'm going to say," Helen said, taking on the maternal tone she used when she needed to be heard. "You need help. And if that girl from your work offered support, maybe it's time to accept it." David looked at her surprised. "I thought you didn't approve." "I don't approve of many things in life, David. But I approve even less of seeing my son-in-law killing himself with work and my grandson suffering because all the adults responsible for him are overwhelmed." Helen paused, observing Ethan, who was drawing intently in a chair in the corner of the room. "Maybe I was too hard on you about this Caroline. If she is a good person and is offering sincere help, well, pride doesn't put food on the table or take care of a sick child." Helen's words represented a complete turnaround from her previous position, and David realized that her temporary physical fragility had softened some of her inflexible certainties about relationships and class differences. "Helen, you don't need to thank me. You just need to think with your head, not with your wounded pride." She squeezed his hand once more. "And if this woman really cares about you and Ethan, maybe it's time to give her a chance to prove it." That night, while helping Ethan get ready for bed, David reflected on the conversation with Helen. The physical and emotional exhaustion of the past weeks had cracked his armor of self-sufficiency, forcing him to confront a truth he had been avoiding. He needed help, and Caroline had offered that help more than once. Maybe Helen was right. Maybe it was time to swallow his pride and accept that asking for support was not a sign of weakness, but of maturity and responsibility towards the people who depended on him. "Dad," said Ethan sleepily, already lying in bed, "do you think Caroline would like to visit Grandma Helen in the hospital?" His son's innocent question echoed exactly the thoughts David had been avoiding for days. "I don't know, Ethan. Maybe. You could ask her." And maybe, David thought as he turned off the bedroom light, he really could. The white envelope with the seal of the Federal Republic arrived on a rainy Thursday in September, delivered by the mailman with the solemnity reserved for official correspondence. David found the document when he got home after yet another exhausting day, dividing his time between work, visits to Helen, who was still slowly recovering from surgery at home, and caring for Ethan. His hands trembled slightly as he tore open the seal. The letterhead from the IRS contained words that seemed to leap off the page like daggers. "Notice of assessment, detected irregularities, omission of income, fines and interest." "Dad, what is this?" Ethan asked, observing the look of panic that settled on his father's face. "Nothing much, son, just some papers from the government," David lied, trying to mask the despair that was beginning to take hold of his chest. The numbers in the document were astronomical: $142,000 in allegedly unpaid taxes, plus fines and interest that brought the total to over $200,000. The problem lay in the income tax returns from the last 3 years. During the marriage, Mary had insisted on filing the return in his name to optimize the couple's taxes, using knowledge she claimed to have acquired in an accounting course. Now, 2 years after her departure, David discovered that she had omitted substantial income from freelance work and consulting she had done for companies in Washington, D.C., income that appeared under his Social Security number as if it were his. That night, after putting Ethan to bed, David sat at the kitchen table with all the documents spread out before him. Calculators, old bank statements, copies of income tax returns, and the dreaded notice of violation formed a mosaic of his shattered financial life. No matter how much he turned the numbers over, the conclusion was always the same. He had no way to prove his innocence without the help of a competent tax attorney, and he didn't have the money to hire one. The worst aspect of the situation was not even the impossible doubt, but the implications for custody of Ethan. The document mentioned the possibility of his name being included in the credit registry, which could be interpreted by the courts as financial instability in a potential custody dispute. The following Friday, David arrived at the office looking like someone who hadn't slept in days. His hands trembled imperceptibly as he typed meaningless reports, and he jumped at every phone call, fearing it would be some communication from the IRS, or worse yet, a call from Mary claiming custody of Ethan due to his financial irresponsibility. "David, can I talk to you?" Caroline said, approaching his desk during lunch hour when most of the employees had left. He lifted his eyes from the papers he was pretending to organize. Caroline wore a dark grey blazer over a white blouse, her hair pulled back in a bun that highlighted the genuine concern in her almond-shaped eyes. "Of course. I noticed that you seem overwhelmed lately. Since your mother-in-law's hospitalization, you haven't been yourself." She pulled out a chair and sat close to his desk. "I want you to know that you can count on me if you need to talk or any kind of help." David stared at her for a moment, internally debating between maintaining the facade that everything was under control or admitting that his life was crumbling rapidly. "It's complicated," he finally said. "Financial problems usually are." Her statement caught him off guard. How had she deduced so easily? "I have experience with tax issues," Caroline explained, noticing his surprise. "I worked for 2 years at a consulting firm specializing in tax compliance before coming here. I recognized the symptoms of tax stress from miles away." An awkward silence settled between them. David felt he was on the edge of a precipice, where admitting his vulnerability would mean accepting help from someone he had been trying to keep at arm's length for months. "David," Caroline said softly, "whatever the problem is, it has a solution. The IRS is very intimidating, but there are installment programs, possibilities for contesting, negotiation options that most people are unaware of." "You don't understand," he replied, frustration finally overcoming his resistance. "It's not just the doubt. It's what this means for my son's custody. If Mary finds out I'm being investigated—" "Mary is your ex-wife?" "Yes. And if she uses this against me in court—" Caroline remained silent for a few moments, clearly processing the gravity of the situation. "Do you have the notification documents with you?" David hesitated. Showing the papers would mean completely exposing his disastrous financial situation to someone he had spent months trying to impress professionally. "David," Caroline said firmly, "I'm not asking as your supervisor. I'm asking as a friend." The word friend echoed between them with an emotional weight that both recognized, but none dared to comment on. Slowly, David opened the drawer of his desk and took out the IRS documents. Caroline studied them with professional attention, occasionally jotting down notes in a small notebook. Her eyes scanned the numbers and dates with the expertise of someone who had dealt with similar situations multiple times. "This is clearly a case of undue liability," she said after 15 minutes of silent analysis. "The omitted income isn't yours, and it's possible to prove this with a proper audit of your ex-wife's bank accounts and employment contracts. But I don't have money to hire a tax attorney." "Let me make a few calls," Caroline said, returning the documents. "I have contacts in Washington, D.C. who can guide you on free legal assistance programs for cases like this." "Caroline, I can't accept—" "You're not accepting anything," she gently interrupted. "You're allowing a friend to use her professional knowledge to help someone in an unfair situation." That afternoon, while Ethan did his homework at the kitchen table and David prepared a simple dinner of rice, beans, and fried eggs, he reflected on the conversation with Caroline. For the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of hope that perhaps his situation wasn't entirely hopeless. "Dad," Ethan said, interrupting his thoughts, "you seem less worried today." "You think?" "I think. You're not frowning as much." Ethan paused, nibbling on the end of his pencil. "Was it because of Caroline?" Ethan's direct question made David smile for the first time in days. "Maybe, champ. Maybe." "I told you she was nice," Ethan said, returning to his math homework with a satisfied smile. "And maybe," David thought as he stirred the beans on the stove, Ethan was right about many things that adults unnecessarily complicated. The first phone call came on the morning of an October Monday, when the jacaranda trees began to bloom in the neighborhoods of New York, painting the streets purple. David was organizing the papers on his desk when the company phone rang with the typical insistence of important calls. Johnson and Associates, David speaking. "Mr. David Johnson," said a formal female voice on the other end of the line. "This is Dr. Patricia Smith from the tax law firm, Smith and Associates in Washington, D.C. Ms. Caroline Anderson referred your case to me." David's heart raced. Caroline had promised to make a few calls, but he didn't expect such a quick response. "Yes, that's me. We have preliminarily analyzed your situation, and we have good news. There is indeed a possibility of contestation through a federal tax regularization program that few know about. Would it be possible for us to meet this week to discuss the details?" Sure, but I need to be honest about my financial situation. I can't afford to—" "Mr. David," the lawyer gently interrupted, "Ms. Caroline has already taken care of all the legal fees. Your only focus should be gathering the necessary documentation for us to build your defense." David felt his blood run cold. "What do you mean she took care of the fees?" "She made the full payment for our services yesterday via bank transfer. She mentioned that you two are close." When he hung up the phone, David remained still for several minutes, processing the magnitude of what he had just discovered. Caroline hadn't just made a few calls. She had hired and paid a tax law firm to resolve his issues. The humiliation he felt was proportional to the gratitude, creating a whirlwind of conflicting emotions that he didn't know how to process. 2 hours later, Caroline appeared at his cubicle with a carefully neutral expression, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Can I sit for a minute?" "Caroline, what did you do?" David asked directly, his voice low but laden with tension. "I helped a friend in trouble. You paid a lawyer for me, without consulting me. I paid a competent lawyer to resolve a tax injustice that was ruining your life," she replied, maintaining a calm tone. "And I did consult you. You showed me the documents and said you didn't have the resources to defend yourself properly. That didn't give you the right to make decisions for me?" Other employees began to discreetly look in their direction. Caroline noticed and suggested, "Can we talk in the smaller meeting room?" The meeting room on the 12th floor was an intimate space with a round wooden table and windows that offered a view of the hustle and bustle of 15th Street. Once alone, with the door closed, the tension between them exploded with full force. "David, why are you angry with me for trying to help you?" "Because you don't understand," he replied, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "You don't understand what it's like to be treated like a charity project. Is that how you see what I did?" "How else should I see it? The rich executive saving the poor incompetent employee who can't even solve his own problems." Caroline's face hardened. "That's unfair, and you know it." "It's unfair. You show up in my life at a moment of humiliation, pay my bill at a restaurant in front of my son, become my boss, and now solve my legal problems without even asking me if that's what I want. And what did you want? To see your life destroyed by pride? I wanted the chance to solve my own problems. With what money, David? With what time? You were working late hours, taking care of your mother-in-law, raising your son alone, and on top of that, facing a tax investigation that could result in losing custody of him. The mention of Ethan hit David like a punch to the stomach. It was true that he was losing control on all fronts simultaneously, but admitting it meant accepting that he needed help, specifically her help. It's not just about the money, Caroline. Then what is it about? It's about what this means, he exploded, finally verbalizing the fears he had been suppressing for months. It's about me being a project for you to feel good about yourself. It's about you eventually getting tired of playing savior and going back to your world of rich and successful people. Caroline stared at him in silence for a long moment, her eyes reflecting a mix of pain and disappointment. "Is that really what you think of me?" "I don't know what to think of you anymore," David admitted, his voice losing its aggression and gaining a tone of deep fatigue. "I don't know if you're here because you care about me, or because I represent some kind of exotic experience." "Exotic experience," Caroline repeated, her voice icy. "Interesting choice of words." "Caroline, I didn't mean to—" No, it was very clear. She stood up from her chair with precise movements, smoothing her blazer skirt and heading for the door. "For your information, David, I grew up poor in a small town. My mother cleaned offices at night to pay for my education. I earned a scholarship to a prestigious university through merit, not privilege. And every dollar I have today was earned through hard work." David felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. "Caroline, and to complete your education about my supposed privileged life," she continued, her voice now sharp as a blade, "I paid your lawyer with the money I saved by selling my ex-husband's wedding ring. So, yes, you're right, it was indeed charity." She left the room, slamming the door, leaving David alone with the crushing weight of his thoughtless words and the brutal truth he had just discovered about the woman he had judged so wrongly. That afternoon, he couldn't concentrate on anything. The numbers on the spreadsheets danced before his eyes without making sense, and every attempt to work was interrupted by the memory of the pained expression on Caroline's face when she left the room. Sarah appeared in his cubicle around 4 o'clock, discreetly noticing when something is fundamentally wrong. "David, do you want to talk?" "I think I made a huge mistake, Sarah." "With Caroline?" He looked at her, surprised. "How do you know?" "Dear, everyone in the office noticed that you two have been in a strange dance for months. And today, after you left that meeting room, your faces were tighter than a bank vault." David sighed deeply. "I accused her of terrible things, things that aren't true." "And what are you going to do to fix this?" Sarah's question echoed in his mind for the rest of the afternoon. What could he do to mend a wound he had opened with his own words, poisoned by insecurity and wounded pride? At 6 o'clock, as he prepared to leave and pick up Ethan, David saw Caroline walking down the hallway toward the elevator. She didn't look his way or greet him, and he realized that he might have lost not only a potential romantic partner, but also a genuinely good person who had tried to help him in the only way she knew how. Mardi Gras brought an unrecognizable New York, with street parties turning every corner into a stage of celebration. The sound of the Black Balloons Parade echoed through the streets of downtown, blending with the joyful shouts of costumed revelers occupying every available space in the city. David walked through the crowded streets of a vibrant neighborhood with Ethan, both wearing colorful masks bought from a street vendor, trying to distract themselves from the turbulent past few months. "Dad, look at all the people," Ethan shouted, needing to raise his voice above the music blaring from makeshift speakers. The boy wore a simple pirate costume that Mary had sewn during her recovery, while David wore only a golden mask and a floral shirt borrowed from the neighbor. "It's Mardi Gras, champ. All of New York is out on the streets today." They moved slowly through the crowd, carried by the human current following the float decorated with streamers and confetti. The smell of street kebabs, cotton candy, and cold beer hung in the warm summer air, creating an atmosphere of collective euphoria that dramatically contrasted with David's emotional state. It had been 3 months since he and Caroline had barely spoken at the office. After the devastating argument in the meeting room, she maintained a professional coldness that hurt more than any direct confrontation. Their interactions were limited to the strictly necessary for the company's functioning, always with witnesses present, always with the icy courtesy reserved for unwanted strangers. The tax issue had been completely resolved through the work of the lawyer hired by Caroline. The gathered documentation conclusively proved that the omitted income belonged exclusively to Mary, and the IRS had cancelled all penalties imposed on David. But the legal victory had a bitter taste because he knew he owed his financial freedom, and consequently the security of Ethan's custody, to the generosity of a woman he had deeply hurt. "Dad, isn't that lady over there?" Ethan suddenly asked, pointing to a group of people near a corner bar decorated with colourful flags. David followed the direction of his son's finger and felt his heart race. Caroline was there, wearing a white dress patterned with yellow flowers, her hair flowing in natural waves, a silver Venetian mask hanging around her neck. She was laughing at something, a tall man. Dressed elegantly in a navy polo shirt, he had said. The man was clearly older than her, perhaps in his 40s, with dark hair styled with gel, an athletic build, and a natural confidence that screamed high social status. His teeth were too perfect to be natural. His watch seemed to cost more than David's annual salary, and the way he possessively placed his hand on Caroline's waist made the nature of their relationship clear. "Let's get out of here, Ethan," David said, trying to guide his son in the opposite direction. "But I want to say hi to her. It's been a while since we saw Caroline." Before David could stop him, Ethan slipped from his hand and ran toward the group, weaving through the revelers with the natural agility of children. "Caroline, Caroline!" he shouted, waving enthusiastically. Caroline turned toward the familiar voice, her eyes genuinely lighting up upon seeing Ethan, but immediately stiffening as she noticed David reluctantly approaching behind the boy. "Ethan, what a surprise to see you here," she said, bending down to be at the child's level. "You're dressed as a pirate. You look great. Grandma Helen made it for me. She's doing much better with her leg." Ethan looked curiously at the man beside Caroline. "Who is he?" "Ethan, this is Edward, a friend from Washington, D.C., Caroline replied, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Edward extended his hand to David with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Edward Smith. You must be the colleague that Caroline mentioned." "David Johnson," he replied, shaking the offered hand and immediately feeling the excessive strength of the grip. A classic display of male dominance. "Dad, can you invite Caroline and Edward to get ice cream with us?" Ethan suggested, with the devastating innocence typical of children who still didn't understand social nuances. An awkward silence settled over the group, interrupted only by the sounds of the carnival around them. Caroline looked back and forth between Ethan and David, clearly torn between her affection for the child and the discomfort of the situation. "What a lovely idea," Edward said, his voice laden with barely concealed condescension. "But unfortunately, we already have commitments for the rest of the afternoon, don't we, dear?" The word "dear" was pronounced with deliberate emphasis, and David felt a stab in his chest that he hadn't expected. "Of course," Caroline replied, avoiding eye contact with David. "Maybe another time, Ethan." "Okay," the boy said, clearly disappointed. "But you promise you'll visit us?" Caroline finally looked at David, her eyes revealing a mix of sadness and determination. "I promise I'll try." Edward placed his arm around Caroline's shoulders in a gesture that was simultaneously protective and possessive. "Come on, dear. Our flight to Washington, D.C. is at 9 in the morning, and we still need to organize your things." The information hit David like a bullet. Caroline was leaving New York. "Are you moving?" Ethan asked, verbalizing exactly the question David couldn't bring himself to ask. "I'm considering some professional opportunities in Washington, D.C., she replied vaguely. "Nothing definite yet." "Very definite, actually," Edward corrected with a triumphant smile. "My father's company offered Caroline an executive position. Salary 3 times her current one, profit sharing, company car. Impossible to refuse." David felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Not only was Caroline leaving New York, but she was doing so to reunite with an ex who clearly belonged to the same privileged world as she did. "It's a very good opportunity," Caroline said, her voice sounding forced. "And Edward and I, well, we're trying to reconcile." "More than trying," Edward said, kissing the top of her head. "We're getting married next month. Small ceremony in Washington, D.C., just family and close friends." David's world completely collapsed. All his fears about class differences and social incompatibility were materializing before his eyes. Caroline was returning to her rightful place, beside a man who could offer her everything an accountant from the East Side could never provide. "Congratulations," he managed to murmur, his voice almost inaudible above the music. "Thank you," Caroline replied, and for the first time since the conversation began, her eyes met his. For a moment, David saw something that looked like regret, or perhaps just pity. "Let's go, Ethan," David said, holding his son's hand more tightly than necessary. "But Dad—" "Now, Ethan." As they moved away through the crowd of revelers, David heard Edward comment loud enough to be heard, "Interesting the types of people you work with in New York, dear." And Caroline's response, too low to be fully understood, but laden with a tone that could be both defensive and explanatory. Ethan remained silent the entire way home, instinctively sensing that something fundamental had changed that carnival afternoon. And David, walking through the streets that were slowly emptying as night fell, began to accept a painful truth. Perhaps Helen had been right all along. Perhaps people like him and people like Caroline truly belonged to different worlds. And maybe this whole story had been just a romantic fantasy he had allowed to grow beyond the limits of reality. April arrived with the autumn settling firmly into the city. The pink flowers of the trees along Fifth Avenue began to fall, dancing with the wind and covering the sidewalks like abandoned wedding petals. David was walking to work on a Tuesday morning, watching the trees through the fogged window of the subway, when he received an unexpected call. "David, this is Sarah. Can you come to the office earlier today? Something strange happened here." "What kind of strange thing?" "It's better you see it in person. It has to do with Caroline." David's heart raced. It had been 2 months since Caroline returned to Washington, D.C., and the office felt empty without her presence. Mark had temporarily taken over her duties, but everyone missed her. His efficient leadership and ability to solve complex problems with natural grace. When he arrived at the office, he found Sarah at the reception with a worried expression, holding a brown envelope in her hands. "What happened?" "This arrived early today by express mail. Sender, Caroline Anderson. Recipient, you. But the strange thing is that there's a letter addressed to the entire team." David took the envelope with slightly trembling hands. Inside were 2 documents, an official letter on letterhead and a handwritten personal letter in her elegant and familiar handwriting. "Do you want me to read the letter to the team out loud?" Sarah asked. "Yes, please." Sarah called all the employees to the conference room. Mark, who had arrived just minutes earlier, looked equally intrigued by the unexpected correspondence. "Everyone," Sarah began, opening the official letter, "Caroline sent this to all of us. Dear colleagues at Johnson & Associates, I'm writing this letter to inform you of a serious discovery I made a few weeks ago. During my stay in Washington, D.C., I discovered that the IRS investigation against David Johnson was motivated by an anonymous tip made by Edward Smith, my ex-husband. Edward hired a private investigator to gather information about my life in New York, including my personal and professional relationships. When he found out about my closeness to David, he deliberately sought to harm him through this false tip, hoping it would convince me to return to Washington, D.C. I confronted Edward with the evidence I gathered, including emails exchanged with the investigator and payment receipts for the services. He admitted everything, claiming he did it out of love and that men like David don't deserve women like me. Obviously, I severed any possibility of reconciliation with Edward and reported his actions to the appropriate authorities. He will face criminal charges for false reporting. David, if you are reading this, you need to know that I never knew of Edward's intentions. Had I discovered it earlier, I would have stopped everything. You did not deserve to go through this suffering. Sincerely, Caroline Anderson. The silence that followed the reading was so dense it felt solid. David felt the blood pulsing in his temples as he processed the magnitude of the revelation. The entire tax investigation, all the stress, the threat to Ethan's custody, everything had been a cruel revenge orchestrated by a man who could not bear the thought of losing Caroline to someone he considered socially inferior. "My God," murmured Mark, breaking the silence. This is monstrous." "And the personal letter?" Sarah asked gently. "Do you want to read it alone?" David nodded, putting the envelope in the inner pocket of his jacket. He needed privacy to process what Caroline had specifically written to him. During lunch, sitting alone in the small buffet restaurant on Baruch Street, where he usually had his meals, David opened the personal letter with slightly trembling hands. "David, I don't even know how to start apologizing for what Edward did. When I discovered the truth, I felt such immense anger that it took me several days to write this letter coherently. You were right about many things you said during that terrible argument we had. I truly didn't understand what it meant to accept help when pride is wounded and responsibilities are enormous. I didn't understand how my generosity could be interpreted as condescension because I never had to accept help from someone I was romantically attracted to. But you were wrong about one fundamental thing, about my feelings for you being superficial or temporary. It wasn't pity that made me pay that bill at the restaurant, nor charity that made me hire the lawyer. It was love. Love that grew from the very first moment I saw you protecting your son's dignity in an impossible situation. I returned to Washington, D.C. because I believed you would never be able to forgive me for hurting your pride. I thought it would be easier for both of us if I simply disappeared from your life. I made the same mistake you did. I allowed pride and fear to prevent me from fighting for what truly mattered. Edward approached me offering a life that seemed safer, more predictable, a life where I wouldn't have to navigate the complexities of loving someone from a different world than mine. But in the last 2 months, I've discovered that security without love is just a beautiful prison. I don't know if you can forgive me for what happened. I don't know if I can forgive myself for doubting us, but I know I need to try. If there's any chance of us starting again, this time being completely honest about our fears and hopes, I would really like to talk to you. I will be in New York next Saturday at Central Park near the Koi Pond at 3 in the afternoon. If you show up, I will understand that there is a possibility. If you don't show up, I will understand that too, and I will respect your decision. With love and sincere regret, Caroline. P.S. Tell Ethan that I miss his drawings and the impossible questions only kids can ask. David read the letter 3 times before he could fold it and put it back in the envelope. His feelings oscillated between anger at what Edward had done, relief at discovering that his suspicions about Caroline were wrong, and a terrible fear of opening himself up again to the possibility of being hurt. That night, while helping Ethan with his math homework at the kitchen table, the boy made an observation that surprised him. "Dad, you seem different today." "Different how?" "More, I don't know, less sad, like when you're waiting for something good to happen." David smiled despite himself. Ethan's emotional perception continued to be eerily accurate. "Ethan, what do you think about Caroline?" "I like her." "Why?" "What if he told you that maybe she wants to be our friend again?" Ethan's eyes lit up immediately. "Really? Is she coming back?" "Maybe. If I can be brave enough." "Brave enough for what?" "To apologize for the bad things I said to her. And to tell her that I miss her a lot." Ethan dropped the... David looked seriously at his father. "Dad, remember when you taught me that when we mess up, we have to apologize?" "I remember. And that people who truly care for each other can forgive one another." "Yes, then you need to go talk to her, because I think you really care about each other." Saturday arrived with a clear blue sky and a pleasant autumn temperature. David had been nervous since he woke up, changing clothes 3 times and arriving at Central Park an hour early. He sat on a bench near the lake, watching the colorful koi fish lazily swim in the crystal-clear water, mentally rehearsing the words he wanted to say. At exactly 3 o'clock, he saw Caroline walking down the path toward him. She wore dark jeans, a simple white top, and sneakers, a more casual and approachable version of the elegant woman he knew. Her hair was down, gently swaying with her steps, and she carried an expression of hope mixed with anxiety. When she saw him, she smiled shyly and waved. David got up from the bench, feeling his heart beat so loudly that he feared she could hear it. "You came," she said, stopping a few meters away. "I almost didn't come," he admitted honestly. "I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Of messing everything up again, of not being the man you deserve." Caroline stepped a little closer. "David, can I tell you something? I'm scared too. Scared that you won't be able to forgive me. Scared that we won't be able to overcome our differences. Scared of hurting you again, unintentionally." They stared at each other for a moment, 2 adults wounded by the past, but still hopeful about the future. "Caroline," David finally said, "I love you. And that terrifies me because it means you have the power to completely destroy me." "And I love you," she replied, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "And that also terrifies me because it means I need to trust that you won't reject me every time I try to care for you. Can we try again? This time being honest about our fears instead of pretending they don't exist?" Caroline smiled through her tears. "We can try." And when she stepped closer and he kissed her there, in the middle of the park, with the koi fish swimming peacefully in the lake and the afternoon sun filtering through the trees, David knew that some love stories truly deserve second chances.